Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Paperless Lunch and Learn. I'm going to just maybe give it another minute or so for people to join. I see we've got a number of people join, but there's also still a number that have registered for the event but have not come in yet. So I'll be kind and give them a minute or so here. I just saw two more people join in, which is great. Okay, that should be, I think I was kind enough there to give them an extra minute or a minute and a half here to join in. This session is being recorded like all of our other sessions. So if you would like this session to be distributed to yourself with a video format, we can actually send that to you, and then you can distribute it to others in your company as well. Plus those that have not signed or that have signed up and registered for the event that are not on board today, we'll obviously reach out to them as well. Welcome again to another Paperless Lunch and Learn. Today's session is to me, it's really exciting because it's talking about efficiencies and how to improve efficiencies. And there's a lot of things to be efficient about. I was actually on a call this week with a company that we were working with to uh, move forward with paperless, and they were talking about just trying to improve their efficiencies of their data collection reporting. I'm like, well, that's one side of it, but there's really two sides to efficiencies improvements, right? You've got the obviously, I'm going to take a process of recording information and make that simpler. But what about the information that now you get from that data that's being reported, and turn that into improving efficiencies for things that you manufacture, not just things that you do, like having to write down things on a piece of paper, but also how you manufacture your end items and improving your efficiencies for your processes for manufacturing, which obviously can roll into your bottom line as well. So again, it's an exciting topic. I'm going to kind of go through kind of 5 ways to improve. There's a lot more than these 5, of course. I just kind of chose 5. I have some customer testimonials and interviews I'm going to throw out here, as well as some data that supports what efficiencies they've seen. So let's get into it. The 5 areas that I kind of want to talk about is, number 1, errors. Looking at the errors that are actually being entered in, and obviously the inefficiencies that get caused, and how improving those can really help your bottom line. Rates, standard run rates for jobs and amount of time it takes to actually run things. Obviously, rates are included throughout your whole manufacturing process, where you are using them to actually produce a expected completion date and ultimately a delivery date to customers. Nesting is another form of efficiency, grouping things together, working on things at the same time, reporting things in one step rather than multiple steps. Information and paper, communicating things out to the floor. Obviously, in the traditional sense, paper is obviously a good method, but there's better methods today. And then scrap. I think we all can look at scrap and say, geez, we want to have a 0 scrap impact on our manufacturing floor. And that's something that we should all probably strive towards. But even if you have very low scrap, still driving that lower, and obviously getting efficiencies from understanding where scrap is, what it is, and how can I remove it from my processes. I'm going to start this off with an interview that we did with a company, Sub-Zero Manufacturing, which makes high-end refrigerators, freezers, appliances for commercial and private businesses. In this interview we did, actually really highlighted some of the errors that they're receiving in. So I'll let this play through, and then I'll walk through the example we did with them.
Now, I know, Maya, when we were talking about going from your MDCC traditional system over to MAS, we talked about return on investment, and I know you had some ideas at that point of goals that you had. Can you share any information about ROI?
Yeah, definitely. So as part of this project, we did track. So we had three main goals to track. One, the biggest reason for this was eliminating operator error. So operators, there was nothing that they were using before to really tell them, what MO they were working on other than a piece of paper. If they forgot that, they'd have to go back. So we wanted to get all this information in one area, primarily to reduce errors. And we tracked that across prior to the implementation as well as several months after. And what we found is during that time, of all the operator reports, we found about 2% of them had to be adjusted, which that's not a huge percentage, but when you look at the volume of around 6,000 to 10,000 reports by the operators per month per plant, that accounts to a lot. And we were able to reduce that 2% down to 0.1%. solely because of the implementation of this MES system, because it is the one-stop shop. It's live data. It's right there. And there's a big spike, of course, right when you implement, but I mean, those numbers, that 2% down to 0.1%, if you think of the volume of the MOs on that, each of those fixes, it's not just going in and fixing the MO, it's the time spent somebody figuring out that else did something wrong, figuring out what they did, communicating that, and then finally you get to the execution of fixing that adjustment. So being able to remove all of that time frame is just, it was a huge benefit. The other thing we measured, again, like I mentioned, is the amount of MOs that we were able to work on. So we went from around 6,000 MOs to 10,000 MOs a month. I can't say that was because of MES, but it's because we were ramping up production. However, we were able to almost double the amount of fabrication that we were doing while at the same time reducing the amount of errors. So both of those things coming together, increase in volume, reduction in errors, it was an enormous benefit. And again, those are real numbers that I was able to pull out, and record each month for our fabrication areas.
That's some good information there. Maya did a great interview. He has some spreadsheets and stats and numbers to back up everything that he was just mentioning there. The important things to kind of walk out or walk away from that interview was, they had 2% errors, right? Which if you think about 2%, wow, I think most of us would say, yeah, that's great. We're actually doing really well as a business, but they strive to actually drive that number even lower, right? And as I go through my numbers here, as I had a side conversation with Maya to kind of put some of this to a value that you get from it, right? So we look at Maya's numbers here, just kind of thinking about it. He said they did 6,000 transactions per month, right? And they also had 2% errors, so which is not much, right? So if you're thinking about that, 6,000 times 2% is 120 errors that they were going through on a monthly basis, right? Well, Maya actually made a comment there, it's actually looking at the time it takes to fix any one of those errors. So I just kind of throw out a really low, very conservative number here of 10 minutes to correct it. Now, you're thinking about correcting it, first you got to be able to identify the error. Then once you identify it, you got to actually investigate, all right, what type of error is it? Kind of disposition it, and then you have to go out and actually contact the person. Maybe it's a supervisor. The supervisor needs to go down to the employee. So you're going to three different levels in order to correct an error. So really, 10 minutes is on the very low side of being able to correct an error. I'd put that on the side of saying that the person that's looking at the error can correct it themselves, rather than having to do any further investigation. So if you take that 10 minutes, right, and say, all right, that's basically 20 hours per month they actually are spending on correcting these errors, right? So you take, obviously the 2%, and now you look at it and say they drove this from 2% down to 0.1%, which is really good. So that actually says, all right, I'm taking those 20 hours that I spent every month correcting these errors, and I drove that 20 hours down to 1 hour, which obviously easy math there, right? You have 19 hours per month that you're actually saving from correcting errors on a kind of daily basis almost, right? Let's take that now, kind of blow it out even further. He said they went from 6,000 transactions up to 10,000 transactions, right? Again, obviously using my 2% kind of thing and saying, all right, here's 10,000 errors. I get 200 errors a month. 10 minutes of correction, that's taking 33 hours, right? So basically taking 33 hours, going to the 0.1% of errors, reducing the number of errors. That took us down to 1.67 hours, which you think about that, that's over 31 hours a month that you're saving for those, or for correcting errors, which is just enormous numbers, right? Now you take this and then say, all right, you know what, we got 10 minutes, and that's on the very low end. Like I said, I was being conservative, and that gives us our 1 hour of saving, or excuse me, our 1 hour of error maintenance every month. Well, what about 30 minutes, which is maybe a little bit more realistic, or somewhere maybe in between there. Well, 30 minutes means that you're spending 60 hours today actually working on and correcting those errors, and that 60 hours goes down to 3 hours. So you can see how exponentially your savings goes up, or your efficiencies go up just dramatically, by reducing that number of errors from 60 hours down to 3 hours. Also, when they increased that production to 10,000, right, they actually went and reduced it to 1.67 hours. Well, actually that really reduced it to about 95 hours of savings, right? So taking my 30-minute time, obviously figuring out it's about 100 hours per month. And that was reduced to 5 hours by reducing my 2% errors down to 0.1% errors. And that was obviously reducing my overall time to 95 hours, which is really just a huge, huge number. Now you think about this, that's only on a monthly basis. Multiply the number of months by obviously the calendar year, as well as the number of plants that they have, and it's just a huge saving across the board from a time standpoint. And Maya mentioned in his interview, I'm not sure if people caught it, but he mentioned that when they increased their production from 6,000 units up to 10,000, or increased their production units, he said, Paperless wasn't quite directly responsible for that, and he kind of hesitated when he said that. Yeah, obviously demand in their business obviously forced them to increase production, but it also, looking at the efficiencies that they've gained through the use of Paperless, allowed them to increase that production without increasing their workforce. So they actually increased production and the number of units they're producing every month without having to really increase their workforce, which is really, hats off to them, hats off to the application. Hopefully you can see real clearly here when you take those numbers, and I know I did a lot of math in there, but you just think about the number of hours per month that they saved, which is about 95 hours a month. Now you want to take that and not take the efficiency calculation, but you look at the cost calculation. You take your burden rate for whoever is responsible for making the correction to those errors, and even the individuals on the floor that have to get bothered, interrupted with their day-to-day activities, and you're looking at that burden rate, and you can put a cost number to this really easily and see how much savings you're having per month. People always want to look at return on investment. I know it's an old term out there, but you're also looking at the value that a application gives back to you. Much like you guys do in your manufacturing business every day, you're looking at your processes and say, does this provide value to my end result? And if it provides value, great. If it doesn't, I'm going to look for ways to eliminate that. This is one of those value add statements that says, Paperless can really add value to your bottom line. Let's jump over to rates now. where we actually had another conversation with a customer, and looking at what they didn't have any rates. In fact, they were just kind of doing their planning on a best guess scenario kind of basis, right? It's because they didn't have rates, they really couldn't figure out when something needed to be started, but more importantly, when something could actually be completed and delivered to their end customer. So Paperless can help actually define those rates. It can help validate those rates, and then most importantly, it can actually help monitoring those rates. The definition is easy. A lot of our customers, and I would say it's well above 90%, have defined rates. A lot of our customers, I did a survey not too long ago, and it was shockingly lower than I expected. And the survey we did was kind of the confidence level with the rates that they have. And the confidence was, somewhere in the 50 to 60% range. So you can use the Paperless to help validate the rates that you currently have on in your database. So if I have a rate of 1 piece per hour and I want to say, all right, I want to validate that, I can turn on and monitor things on the Paperless side to say, all right, over this last 2 runs of this item, here's the rate it actually took for this specific step in the manufacturing process. And then most importantly, you can actually monitor the rates, and that's like the real-time monitoring out there on the shop floor from a supervisor's perspective, a manager's perspective, or even the operator's perspective themselves to say, how am I doing compared to how I'm expected to be doing? So I'm going to jump over here real quickly and go into my Paperless system. And kind of looking at the rates, right? We talked about rates and where they show up, right? If I look at here, here's my standard run rate, and then here's my actual run rate. So that's that kind of monitoring we talked about from an operator's perspective to validate rates. And we see this being done more so now than in the past, where people can turn on recording real live actual rates and maybe only turn it on for a week or 2 weeks or a month time period. And they're using that information that they're capturing when someone does a start and stop operation. They are using that information to capture real live actual rates and comparing that to the rates that they have defined in their system and adjusting them accordingly, which is great. Another way you can validate rates is obviously through a dashboard. I'm looking at a dashboard here for something that's been running. I can see what's expected versus what's actual. This is helping monitor current activity on the floor, and this could be anybody from a manager to a supervisor down to the actual person working on this job. It's a self-managing tool here where you're looking at a job that's running and how many pieces are to be expected based on a rate that was defined. And then there's other tools in here where if I'm looking at alerts and notifications, here's an alert and notification where I can actually look at my actual rate compared to my expected rate and set thresholds there. Just says, what, if I'm below a certain threshold that I've defined, I want to send out a notification message to somebody. So you think about the efficiency gains that you will have from the 3 things I've just mentioned, obviously helping you define rates, helping you validate the rates that you currently have, and then most importantly, helping you monitor activity against those rates, from again, all levels, supervisors down to the operators on the floor. And then obviously if I'm an operator and I see a dashboard out in front of me that says I'm running behind an expected rate, I can make the necessary changes on my own before my supervisor or somebody else taps me on the shoulder and starts asking me questions why I am not producing to an expected level, right? So that's rates. Let's talk about nesting. It was my 3rd activity here. Nesting, a very common tool out there in the industry. It's used to optimize work, to say I'm doing things at the same time. A very common scenario is cutting sheet steel. That's what my image is displaying, is I'm going to have a piece of sheet steel. I'm going to optimize the utilization of the sheet steel to minimize my scrap, which is a great efficiency thing out there. But then now out on the floor, when someone's actually operating that sheet steel or laser cutter tool, or any tool that actually has multiple jobs running at the same time, they're going to get the efficiency benefits from that. So I have a video out here as well. Again, one of our customers talking about how they're utilizing nesting and how much it is actually helping their business.
Any specific functions that you've used that have had the greatest impact on your business?
I would say that the biggest feature, the biggest impact we got was to use the nesting feature in Paperless. We run fabrication departments in all 3 sites. So we fabricate all of our own material. And one of the issues that you have with that is you have all these plasma and laser machines that cut out all of this raw material. But it could be millions of different part numbers. We're a very custom built shop. So each one of our trailers can be different. So you don't have, I mean, we have common stock, but we don't really have common stock. You want to cut by trailer. And so that means on every single one of our nests that come out of our engineering department, I can have 100 different part numbers on there, which would lead me to 100 different manufacturing orders, which means that the poor guy at the plasma who has to cut all of this out has to then job on to 100 manufacturing orders. And I don't care what system you're on, that's a lot of work. And it's not something you want. You don't want your shop floor personnel to be spending time trying to find orders to job on and job off.
Not
So
value.
I call it no value add on that one. So it's called nesting in Paperless. I call it grouping because it gets confusing when you're speaking to engineering. And basically what it lets me do is take all of the manufacturing orders that conform to a specific engineering nest and create a single job on, job off, and issue material point for that operation. And that was a huge time saving. Especially we had purchased a new laser cutter in our Athens plant. And by the time they got through jobbing onto all the manufacturing orders that were on that nest, it was done. So it was one of those, we had to come up with something. So the nesting process that's in there, and for them to be able to do all of that in a single or a couple of clicks instead of hundreds, really paid off big in our fabrication department.
So again, you're looking at efficiencies. Shauna said it really well, where you could have 100 jobs that are being worked on at the same time, and using the nesting feature and function within the Paperless MES solution, they're allowed to actually start one group or one nest, as she was referring to it, and under the covers or behind the scenes, all the activities and transactions were created for each one of those manufacturing orders that were defined within that nest. And then even on the back end, when not only starting the job, but when you're stopping a job, that nest, in her example, the laser cutter, you could have been cutting 5 parts of, on manufacturing order 1, 2 parts on manufacturing order 2, 17 parts on manufacturing order number 3, etc. So when you're stopping or ending activity against each one of those orders, you don't want the user to have to enter in all the quantities for each one of those 100 orders in Shauna's instance. Even if it was 5 orders, that's a lot, right? So that nesting application allows you to define how many pieces are being cut out for each group. So it will automatically report the quantities, and the quantities can be different. Like I said, 6 pieces for order 1, 2 pieces for order 2, and 17 pieces for order 3, etc. You're again minimizing the efforts out there on the floor, improving that efficiency. So you get the information right away. Operators have time to do other things rather than spending time at a terminal. Oops, sorry about that. Our next one is paper. Obviously paper, and that's kind of where we started with the paperless application, is reducing the amount of paper. In Maya's interview, and I'm not sure if he heard it, but he actually said they were able to take 5 pieces of paper and also move it into one single electronic element. So you're reducing the number of paper dramatically there. We have another customer of ours that actually reduced the number of pieces of paper that they print from whatever it was by 28,000 pieces, which is a lot. And you think about the efficiencies that you save here, right? Obviously, there's, printing, which has a number of different elements. Obviously, the paper, which is more of a hard cost. The ink is another hard cost. The printer is a hard cost. But then you've got the labor. And the labor comes from the standpoint of, selecting the jobs to print, grabbing the information off the printer, putting it into a shop packet. All of that stuff had to be done, obviously, so which takes time, and time obviously equals to money. So again, we were able to reduce the number of pieces of paper for an existing customer by 28,000, more than 28,000. Their costs were about $2,400 to $4,000. Their expected labor costs for managing and printing all that stuff out, and everything else surrounding those paper packets was about $30,000. And that's, again, one of those recurring saving type of events where you're just saving over and over again every single year. This is saving me $30,000. Excuse me. My last example here is talking about scrap. One of a quote we've got from one of our customers is really within that first 9 months of actually implementing the paperless software, they reduced their scrap by 50%, which is just a huge number. And obviously that number they equated into their dollars, which is about $250,000 in savings. Huge advantage there. And I think we all realize, scrap is one of those things that we want to drive down to as close to zero as we can, realizing that, you may never get there, but there's always room for improvements from a scrap perspective. How does Paperless do that? A number of different ways. Choosing the top 3 ways is really the number one, quality. Being able to understand when you have a quality issue as early in the process as possible. So if I'm finding that quality error at step number 1 because the user is prompted with some simple checklist or measurements, whatever it may be, that says I'm checking these 3 characteristics at this time, and if any one of them fails, I can automatically alert the necessary people, and maybe it's my supervisor, maybe it's the material review board, maybe it's an engineer, or all of the above, to come over and actually review what's happening to see whether or not those parts can be used as is, whether they can be reworked, or whether they have to be actually scrapped. So understanding that quality, as early in the process as possible, and actually at any time throughout the process as well. And that's for the manufacturing side, but also this happens for the parts side, meaning my parts that I'm purchasing from my vendor. Obviously, if I can understand if those parts meet my quality specifications, that's great. I'm gonna put them into the hopper and they can get used. If I do my testing up front when I'm doing the receiving, and I find that there's issues, I can obviously immediately discard those parts so they don't even get into the whole manufacturing process. Information, the information that is to be worked on is really important. And we talk about reducing paper and making things electronic. Thinking about the engineering drawing or the setup instructions or the assembly instructions, all that information that is critical to be communicated out to the floor in a real-time, accurate type of scenario is really important for helping reduce the amount of scrap. And then my last category here is working on the correct job. I selected this one because myself and another colleague, were just at a site within the last 6 months here where they were working on the wrong job. And by working on the wrong job, they literally had aisles upon aisles of parts that were manufactured that didn't need to be manufactured, that ultimately had to be scrapped. So you're thinking about not only that was just a huge value from a waste standpoint. Obviously, you're working on something, so you've got machine and material and labor that goes into it, and it ultimately all has to get scrapped. It was just ridiculous. So for them, being able to communicate what job to work on at the right time and verify also that the operators were working on the correct jobs was super important to them, and was able to actually streamline their processes and also being able to meet the needs of the demand of their market. So it was a hugely important factor. That's it. Hopefully you gain some value from the efficiencies that you can gain from the Paperless MES solution. And again, there's a lot more ways to be efficient and have Paperless help you be more efficient, if you will. I'll open it up if there's any questions out there. I'll open it up to everybody have questions. I'll turn off everybody's mute buttons so they can actually speak. And I'll also look at my question tab to see if there's any questions here. I do have one question that popped in, is whether or not we have the services in-house to help us understand maybe some possible areas to improve efficiencies. Absolutely. You know, obviously we're a software development company, so we develop manufacturing execution software. But along with that comes vast knowledge in manufacturing and helping existing customers and new customers improve their manufacturing processes. For those of you that know, we've got another side of our company called ISE that has those consultants on hand, and we'd be more than happy to help you identify some areas where you could make improvements with your existing applications. Okay, I don't see any other questions out here. If you do have questions, feel free obviously to reach out to us here at Paperless. We'd be more than happy to answer them, and everybody have a great day.